panel. First of all, the writer and director of this film, who's now responsible for approximately 40% of pop culture, Mr. George Romero. The score and assistant director, and I believe also second unit director on this movie, Mr. John Harrison. And the actor who portrays the world's most sensitive zombie, Bub, Mr. Howard Sherman. The man who assisted Tom Savini on the makeup effects on this film, and now is a producer and director on The Walking Dead, Mr. Greg Nicotero. And finally, Rhodes himself, Joe Pilato. Please sit down and relax. Howard Sherman, no, I invited Howard up, right? The world's most sensitive zombie? Is he still here? Okay, we're gonna wait for him. Okay. We're gonna pause for just a moment, waiting for Mr. Sherman. I mean, I think we can start. That's good. He'll be shuffling to the stage shortly. But George, first of all, I think you said it's been about 10 years since you've seen this film, and I think there's 2 or 3 microphones, so you guys might have to share. But what was it like seeing this film again? And I think you said it's your favorite.
It was great fun. It's my favorite of my zombie films. Yeah. It's really fun to watch it. And John and I, we were just talking about it, saying we couldn't help but laugh, just remembering the good times, It's really part of why I...
Here is Mr. Sherman.
Don't wait, Miss Monroe.
Sorry, George, you were saying.
No, partly why I like the films that I make has to do with the experience of making. And, the experience of making this film, except for a few moments here and there, was wonderful. And everybody was there to just completely cooperate and play ball. And the cast was wonderful, and good friends, and, working with John, and, it was just like old home week or something. It was great. And so I don't know if it's the best film, the zombie films that I've done, but it's certainly my favorite.
This movie kind of brings a new meaning to the term underground movie. I think, I'm not sure, I mean, maybe people all know this, but you're not really looking at sets in this movie. It was really filmed in an underground cavern in a storage facility, and you guys almost sort of lived there for several months. So I'd be interested in knowing from all of you what that experience was like, basically sort of living and working underground for 3 months.
It was dusty.
I got back from London. I've still got the cold from 35 years ago when I was like in there.
We all got desperately sick, and we had this wonderful feel-good doctor who used to come and give us B12 injections. I believe he died of an overdose. But not to be too graphic, but it's a very graphic film. At the end of the day, I used to go back to the hotel room, and when I'd blow my nose, it would be an LSD trip that would just spiral out of there. The working conditions were just well, I don't want to say like we suffered, but we got sick. People got sick.
You know, what was interesting is we never saw the sunlight. You know, we would go into the mine at 7 in the morning and come out at 7 or 8 at night. So we never saw, we would go to the hotel and then go for a long time. But one thing I want to say, there's a lot of the crew that's here that contributed to it. Some of them who I haven't seen in a while. Bruce Miller, Joanne Small, Howard Berger, Ed Lammy. I saw Ed is a zombie in there. So it's great that, you know, after all these years, everyone, we're all still here seeing the movie again. So,
You should actually get them to stand up.
yeah, everybody worked on the movie too.
Hey.
That's really,
I think Howard's the only Oscar winner among us, but besides that.
John, I wanted to talk a little bit about the musical score, and I want George to chime in on this too. I think for a movie like this, you would expect to have a very cold score that's very unemotional and just concentrates, you know, completely on horror. But this is sort of a warm, it's almost an upbeat score, and it's a very sympathetic score to the characters.
You don't think this is an upbeat movie?
Well, it does have a happy ending. Come on.
Well, there was kind of a long history to it, which you know, we've all talked about for years. There was an original script that George wrote, which we never got to make, which was a much bigger version of this story, which we didn't have the budget for. But when George was writing it, and I was going to do the score for it, I would be putting some cues together and sending them down there. He was living in Sanibel Island in Florida, and a lot of the movie was going to be set in a kind of a Caribbean setting, and I wanted to play around with those themes. And we talked about it. The great thing about working with George as his assistant director and his composer was that I was with him all the time. So we would talk. It wasn't like I just got the movie. It wasn't like I would just get the movie and then I'd have 3 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks to score it. So we would talk about what kind of music we wanted. We wanted to be kind of counterintuitive and do something a little bit more melodic. And so once we had the smaller version, we stuck with the same music. And then I was able to get out here with my producer, John Sutton, and with a couple of unbelievably great musicians. One of whom is here, Grant Geisman. I don't know where he is in the audience right now, but yeah, one of the premier jazz musicians of our time, one of the great guitarists, and he does a lot of different kinds of music. 2.5 Men is his score, a little different than this one. But anyway, Grant, I got him on the score, and so we really created a really cool sound. It was a little different than the look of the movie.
Now, I remember you telling me about working in the studio on this, but were you actually working on the score while you were underground, or I'm assuming that was later, right?
Well, not literally, except that when you're working with George, you're always working on the music because he's always sitting there humming along, and while zombies are getting shot in the head and people are getting chewed on, he's always got some little theme to go boom, 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 and you know, this stuff just seeps into your mind. I will say, all seriousness, George still has one of the greatest soundtrack collections that I've ever heard. So he knows music unbelievably. So we would be able to sit there and communicate in a way that, and because he's an editor, we'd be able to talk about music as a story element and not just as some kind of underlying thing.
Well, I can't say enough about this score, and oddly, I think the film was not immediately successful. I think everybody wanted me to remake Dawn of the Dead. And I've tried with each of the zombie films that I've done to make them a little different, and this one I think was a little too different. And the score was actually one of the things that people initially complained didn't like. And then people like Felcher, who put the bomb on this, there were several critics that just trashed this film when it was first
score in terms of themes because of George's character Bub, which is the most iconic zombie ever, right? And we ended up creating a theme for Bub, which was very sympathetic, and then became restated all the way through the score. And fortunately, we had this unbelievable actor sitting over here at the end of the row who brought this character to life with mime and with characterization. I mean, it's just an unbelievable performance.
Yeah, I'm curious about, because on IMDb you're credited with like some soap operas before, but the way IMDb works, it's hard to tell when you were actually doing those. So were you actually part of the group in Philadelphia that got cast, or did you move to do the role? Because most of your actors were local at the time, right? Or Pittsburgh, sorry, excuse me.
No, I lived in New York at the time, and I auditioned in New York, and I met George on the set, actually. I think I auditioned on tape, as I recall.
So you were auditioning for the zombie role. What was your audition like?
I think the thing that I've always wanted to ask George if this is actually true, but there was not really much to the role on the page, and I think I shot and I saluted and then I ate and I sneaked in a turkey leg, and at the moment when I was expected to mime eating, I whipped out the turkey leg and had at it. And I always thought that that's what carried the day.
I think it's almost like a mystery of whether you actually have dialogue in the film. There's a few points where you seem to be speaking. So, when you grab the girl, that one of your first scenes, you actually say, "I'm sorry." Do you remember?
Well, it's difficult to describe. I mean, my basic thought was, the basic thing that I tried to do as I was doing this role was thinking of all this flesh still works, but just not very well. And it's like, and then I remember George had suggested that he wanted Bub to have a quality that was like an infant. And I had happened to have a friend before I came to the set who just had a baby, and I had spent some time with the baby. And it was vivid in my mind. I remember looking at the baby thinking, you're trying to figure out how all this works. If you watch the kind of almost spastic-like movements of a baby, just, an impulse goes down and they have no control over what's happening. Everything is just sort of moving. And I incorporated that. I tried to incorporate that quality of just very poor eye-hand coordination, where you aim for something and sort of miss. And I think I did the same thing with speech. If I had an instinct to communicate some dim thought, it would move my mouth in some ways, but I always made sure that I didn't form recognizable words, or only just barely recognizable words. But the whole thing was kind of an improvisation. It was never a planned thing. It just
Came close with Aunt Alicia.
Well, yeah, it was yes, I still speak, Bob.
And were you actually listening to Beethoven when you got your headphones on?
No, there was nothing in here.
Nothing. Wow. So what were you thinking of for that?
Well, it was edited. Pat edited it in such a way that when it swelled, Howard did this. Right? I can't do it, but you swelled when the music swelled.
Well,
You fell when the music swelled.
this may seem like a joke, but it's actually true. I am a music fiend. I'm into music the way normal men are into sports. And I listened to the imaginary music in that scene the way I really do. to listen to music in my life. It, you know, moves me, and I have to control myself at a concert to not wiggle around too much and make faces, you know, because I really do get engaged. So that, I have to say, in all of my work, is my most personal moment on film. It really is.
So, Joe, you had tons of dialogue.
Yes, I did.
And you had worked with George before. You've got a small role in Dawn of the Dead.
Which actually, due to Dario, is much bigger because we got the short form, and then when you put the triple box together, the whole scene's in there. So for those of you that haven't seen it, but I wanted to get back to something that George said. Just
Also, Night Riders.
and Night Riders, I'm a 3 for men. Night Riders, Dawn and Day. I think I've got a record somewhere. I don't know. When George was talking, when the film came out, and it was not appreciated, I was sitting in my apartment. It was a Sunday. My fiance had just broken up with me, and I'm waiting for Siskel and Ebert to come on. And they ripped the out of this film, and then they go to show you how bad the acting is in this film. Look at this scene. And it's me confronting Laurie with the gun. And I'm sobbing like a baby. But I forgot until tonight how much fun. I mean, I actually was laughing. How much fun we had making this movie.
Joe, it really was completely fun. We were all there. I mean, we were all there to do the gig and having fun with it, as much fun as we could have. And you know, it's over the top. It's supposed to be over the top.
Yeah.
And you know, but
Yeah, I mean, the characters in this movie are very vivid. I mean, everyone comes across very, very powerfully. They're all iconic characters.
It was my best acting ever. I just like to say, I'm fucking awesome in this movie. I have a great story, which I always love to tell about that scene, the big round table scene where everybody's sitting there. So originally, in the original script, there's a soldier that's killed and his head comes back to life. And I was hired July of 1984. And George said, well, Greg, you should be that guy. And then when the script got changed, all of a sudden I had dialogue. And I'm like, guys, I can't really act. And George said, no, it'll be fine, it'll be great. So the scene where I'm smoking fake marijuana, they were just rolling real tobacco cigarettes. So after about 4 takes, I was inhaling tobacco, and the whole room was spinning. And I was getting green, and John comes in and goes, all right, that's lunch. And I'm sitting there, and George comes up and goes, are you okay? I'm like, I can't move. I had so much tobacco in me instantly that George had to literally pick me up and go, come on, let's go to lunch. Because I had no idea what I was doing. That was fun though.
I finally figured this out. If Major Cooper owned a Cooper and his battery fell apart, Greg would have been able to say, Major Cooper's Cooper died today.
So,
I don't think you would have said that.
I don't think I would have said that. I don't think George would have ever written that.
Greg, this movie has, it's by far the most elaborate makeup effects. I mean, the makeup effects are fairly simple in the first 2 zombie movies. And this one, you have real prosthetic makeups, and you have these incredible scenes where people are torn limb from limb in one take. So first of all, how much of this is planned in the script? And how much is Tom Savini and his team actually inventing?
Well, it was all in the script, basically, as I remember. But these guys did it. They had to do it. You're sitting there writing, and you write, they pull them apart. And those guys have to figure out how to do it.
Well, it was really the first time Tom had a crew, because on all the other movies,
A good crew, right?
he had done it all by himself. On Creepshow, he had Daryl Ferrucci with him, but this was the first time that Tom had people, and he hired Howard and Everett Burrell and John Bullock from L.A. They all came to Pittsburgh, and because I was friends with George for years, I went to lunch with him, and he said, "Hey, you want a job? What do you think?" And I went, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, we're going to do Day of the Dead." And he did it in his Italian voice that he does so well. And I literally was, I said, "Well, can I be Tom's assistant?" So I sort of created this weird job for me, which allowed Tom to sort of concentrate on building the effects, and then I would sort of manage the department and order the supplies and break down the script. So it really ended up being a really great experience and allowed a lot of freedom that we didn't really have in other shows.
But that's what you did. You did the organizational stuff that was really required. And that's what you added to Tom.
And kept the team going. I mean, because these guys were like the stunt guys on most movies. They were always the crazy ones riding around. We hear like crashes and bangs and driving the golf carts up over the sword fights and blood fights.
Okay, so imagine working on Day of the Dead and being between 18 and 21 years old. That was how old our whole crew was. Howard was the second youngest. But I mean, talk about a bunch of guys who were huge fans of George's, and then all of a sudden you find yourself sitting on set with the guy who directed Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, and you're working on Day of the Dead. So to put a bunch of 18 to 20-year-olds in that situation, I don't know what else we would. We didn't know what else to do.
I think when I first met you, we met in Italy, right?
Yeah, when I was 14.
Yeah, and he's 14. His dad really wanted him to go into medicine. His dad was a doc, right? And I kept thinking that I kept waiting for your dad to come after me, because I suggested that maybe you should do movies. But
That's a good suggestion. I appreciate it.
Every actor, when they weren't working, wanted to be in the special effects room. In fact, you guys just have to throw us out occasionally. Tom would come in, because they'd have the music blasting, and they're throwing darts and masks that they're making, and it was just, you could either go to the gold mine, or you could be in this, other world, and then Tom would come in and say, "All right, get out of here."
fighting, sword fighting.
How long were you in makeup every day to get that?
My recollection is that it started out about 3.5 hours, but it got better. Yeah, it got faster. I think maybe you had it down to about 2.5, 2:45, once we, sort of perfected it.
Yeah, but talk about, an effects guy's dream. You have someone who brings the makeup to life. It just takes it to a whole other level.
Really?
Watching it like this, which I haven't seen this movie projected in a long time, the actors sell makeup. The makeup can only be so good, but it's just astounding what you brought to it.
I remember very vividly the first time I stood in front of a mirror in the full makeup and was just moving my face around, and it was eerie because, when you look in a mirror and you move and you see movement in front of you, I don't know, it does something in your brain. There's a part of your brain that reads that as yourself. And when you look in the mirror and see Bub looking back at you, it was amazing. But I realized that I had a makeup I experimented with it, and I had a mask that you could do remarkable things with to, your
Expressive.
extraordinary
Really, really, you don't miss anything. All the nuances there. When you change, you suddenly realize something and you see it. You just completely see it, as if you were without makeup.
25 Logan dead.
Yeah.
That was the hardest scene, as I recall. Remember, we tried a lot of different things, and it was kind of, everything had been golden up to that point, from my point of view. It's sort of like, whatever I did, it's sort of like, yeah, that's Bub. But I remember we tried a number of different things, and it just wasn't working. And we couldn't, nobody knew exactly why, but it just, and that choice came, I don't remember how.
And it was your choice, and you just did it beautifully. A tear came to my eye tonight. I mean,
Yeah, the whole thing where he's like, look what I did, look what I did. It's so perfect, and then
Right.
you realize he's dead, and then you get pissed off and start smashing. It's really fantastic.
Thank you.
So what was involved in doing some of these very elaborate shots where people are torn apart? Because I mean, I would assume some of that construction that these bodies are built out has to be edible. So what is this made out of, and how do you keep it looking real until someone's actually tearing it apart?
I think Bruce made some of the, Bruce, you made the edible stuff, didn't you? Yeah. The art department made all the edible.
I never saw any.
no, I was going to say, Joe had to suffer the final scene where he gets torn apart. You guys were using real guts. And they had fermented. Somebody had turned the refrigerator off or something.
Oh, no, yeah, that's what happened is that we had a bucket of guts. We used pig entrails. And when we shot in December before Christmas, we flew to Fort Myers, and we shot the opening of the movie, and then the power in the Wampum mines got shut off. So in January, we came back for 2 more weeks of shooting, and the power had been off for about 4 weeks. So when we were walking towards Savini Land, which was the name of the shop, like 200 yards away, you could smell it. And for some reason, we didn't think to buy new guts. We just figured. No, but I cleaned them in bleach the day before, but we were like, oh, well, Joe, I mean, come on.
I can still smell it. I don't know how homicide cops do it. I can still smell it.
And I'm convinced I got an OSHA lawsuit somewhere against Laurel Bay. I'd probably get some weird pig's disease. It was, the guys had the aspirators on. They were spraying, remember JDs and English leather? Guys are walking around spraying JDs, English leather, they were aspirators on their face. And then I hurled. At the end of the day, we had 1 take, 3 cameras. And they're like, don't blow it. And I got choke on them out. And they said, cut. And I just hurled. I had nothing in my stomach because I should have known something was wrong. Because when I walked in, they said, don't eat or drink anything. And I said, okay.
And is it true that that line was improvised? That you came up with that? So what was it?
Whispered that in George's ear.
Yeah. And Putz Fun, that was.
Oh, that was
very completely yours.
I hit my head on the wall, and I hit it really bad, and I said, it was a German that we could cut, and it was the German. Did you say Potsdam? George goes, yeah, and I like it.
George, how do you approach directing actors? I mean, you do get very theatrical performances, but I think people may underestimate how much acting is in these films. It's not, 2 hours of zombies. It's really quite a lot of human drama.
Well, let's see. I think that the zombie films that I've made are all more about the human characters than the zombie. They're watching them screw up, watching them fail, watching them make bad decisions, and all the politics and everything is always involving the human character. The zombies, they could be, all 6 of this. I made 6, my God. Of the zombie films that I made, the zombies could have been a hurricane or, an earthquake or something.
Or a Congress.
Huh?
That's right.
And they're the annoyance, but it's really about the human behavior.
What were you, I mean, you have very strong roles for African American characters, very strong roles for women in all these movies.
Well, in the first film, forget about it. I mean,
Not so much for women
she
in
was
the first
the
film.
typical femme fatale, or, you know, her heel broke, and she had to run around barefoot. The remake, I wrote the remake basically as an apology to women. But, and that's where I really wrote a much stronger, Barbara was really a strong character. But then I tried to do that, and also with African Americans. I mean, it started almost accidentally because Dwayne Jones was the best actor from among our friends, and when we had written the script, when Jack and I wrote the script, we had written him as a Caucasian. I mean, he wasn't a black guy, and the same things happened to him. People talk about that film as a racial statement, and you know, they thought the posse comes through and shoots the black guy. They shot him in our script when he was white. So, you know, it's just that it was meant to be just an irony and not so much a racial statement. But then I got enamored with, you know, I started to read these things about, well, you know, George gave a role to a black guy that it wasn't written for a black guy. And what a nice thing to do. And so then I got enamored of that. But, you know, Hollywood still has a prejudice about that. I mean, when I did Land of the Dead, I again wrote the character as an African American, and Universal said, "Nix, we have to sell this film in Europe, and they won't buy an African American lead unless it's Denzel." And you know, so I said, "Okay." So I made the lead zombie black. That's a fat bag.
You know, I made a joke about how you are responsible for 40% of pop culture, but you know, zombies are like the thing now, and it's not just a general concept of a zombie; it's your concept of a zombie. And I'm interested in how that idea developed, because I think there's been sort of voodoo versions of zombies in earlier movies.
Voodoo came first.
Yeah, there's been ghouls and stuff, but you know, you sort of created the blueprint of zombies, you know, biting people, infecting people.
I didn't call them zombies. I thought they were a new kind of creature. Because I thought that zombies were those voodoo guys in the Caribbean, you know, doing the wet work for Lugosi. But and you know, after that, now, I was the only guy in this playground for a long time. And then Greg came along. Frank Darabont came along. Whoever caused Walking Dead to happen. Frankly, I've been pissed off ever since.
But at least they're walking and they're not the running dead. That's right.
That's true.
You know, there's an interesting thing too, is that, you know, between Shaun of the Dead and you know, I think video games have done a lot in recent years. You know, in my opinion, zombies have never gone away. I mean, I've worked with George on, you know, a dozen movies, and people ask that question often. Oh, how do you feel that zombies are big again? They've always been there. You know, the fact that now there are video games that bring the zombie culture to teenagers who now want to play shoot 'em up, House of the Dead, and Resident Evil was a big selling point at that point, because then people started sort of paying attention again. So I think that has a lot to do with it. It's the fact that, you know, I think George it's more like 90% of pop culture, because he did write the rules, and they're not called zombies in Night of the Living Dead. I think in Dawn of the Dead they used the word zombies once. Yeah, so, you know, they're his roles. We just play in the field.
Yeah, but, zombies are making in commercials now. I've seen 2 commercials where zombies are buying telephones.
Yeah, it's definitely much more you know, there's always been a great audience for horror, but it's you know, specialized audience in a way, and that now it's a really it's part of mass culture in a way maybe that it wasn't good for.
I know, but can you explain all of it? I mean, how come 500 or 5,000 people come out in Toronto for a zombie walk? I mean, we can't do that, Greg. I mean, we got to pay them all union wages.
Or $1 a day, yeah.
Maybe
We've got a few minutes.
explain the zombie walk phenomenon.
They all know. Everyone knows how to do it. Well, let's actually take some questions from people in the audience like this.